Hey guys, hoping all is well with everyone. So in this video we're going to be concluding the read-along of the Secret Zoo chapters and Specters today, and I'm kind of interested to see exactly what comes about in the next two chapters because there's quite a lot left for us to kind of unpackage, and I'm interested to see if we're going to just be left up in the air with a lot of things, or if there's going to be cliffhangers that kind of lead to kind of our imagination to try to make conclusions. But we're going to start today with chapter 63, but we'll jump into it here. Chapter 63, The Constructor. As the Specters disposed of the Sasquatches, an officer named David Banks entered a room beside the school cafeteria marked Maintenance and Electrical. As he searched with his gun drawn, he noticed an open door and peered through it to see a short flight of steps leading down to an old cellar. Grotesque insects were crawling on the concrete walls, bulbous beetles, thick-legged spiders, and long, slinky centipedes. He glanced over his shoulder and then softly closed the door. As he realized there was no way to lock it, he saw something on the ground, a broken padlock. He picked it up and turned it over in his hand. The U-shaped shackle had been ripped from its steel body. He heard footsteps. Another officer was approaching. He quickly fed the broken shackle through the hasp on the door. Then he reached into his jacket, pulled out a small velvet cloth, and wrapped it around the square piece of steel. He waited a moment and felt his fingers tingle. "Banks?" He turned, a bit too abruptly. Standing at the doorway was a fellow officer, Jimmy Thornton. Banks slipped the velvet back into his jacket pocket, hoping Jimmy hadn't noticed. "Yeah?" Banks said. "Everything okay in here?" Banks nodded. "Room's clear." Jimmy looked at once at Banks' hand, which was now empty. Then he nodded and headed down the hall. Officer Banks extracted the velvet and wrapped the padlock in it a second time. Once again, the magic of the Secret Zoo went to work. David Banks, a man who had a wife, 3 children, and a house, and had spent more than 15 years working for the Clarksville police, was more than an officer. Like the scouts, he was a crosser. But he also served the secret society as a constructor, a person specialized in the repairing damages to the Clarksville Zoo and its surrounding areas. Sometimes the tools were ordinary. Other times, they were not. Officer Banks silently counted to 15 and pulled away the velvet. The lock was fully repaired. He stuffed the material into his pocket, turned, and fled the room, certain he had more work to do. Chapter 64, An Old Acquaintance. On the streets of the city of Species, Mr. Darby stepped up to the main entrance of the secret creepy critters. From the outside, the sector resembled the main Clarksville Zoo exhibit to which it was attached. Its core building had walls that rose in the air like those of an ancient castle, supporting a dome-shaped roof. Dozens of wings projected in all directions like the jointed limbs of a giant spider. Sick green moss spread like a disease over the building's stone blocks. It was storming in the city. Dark clouds had made dusk of day. Rain fell sideways, pounding the streets and the buildings. Streams poured over sidewalks, and puddles covered everything. Most of the animals had retreated into the sectors. Mr. Darby stopped 20 feet in front of the portal into the secret creepy critters. The gateway was being guarded by 2 descenders. They were in gear. One had spikes along her shoulders and back. The other had long elephant-like tusks reaching out from the sleeves of his leather jacket. Standing with his wet gray hair and beard clinging to his body, Mr. Darby uttered, "Leave me." The descenders quickly nodded and rushed off. 2 curtains came together at the middle of the gateway. In the hard wind, the heavy velvet rolled and waved. The curtains occasionally flapped apart, revealing the darkness kept captive within the sector walls. Mr. Darby suddenly called out, "Degraff!" The old man stared at the portal and waited. Rainwater beaded on his dark sunglasses. Wind shaped the curtains in new ways. "Degraff!" Mr. Darby called out, louder this time. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Then the rain-soaked velvet back to the bulge as something from inside pressed against it. Was it him? Was it the man that had haunted the secret zoo for nearly a century? The lump in the curtain began to take shape. The thing pushing against it walked on 4 legs. An animal. Or something like an animal, anyway. Something appeared through the slit between the curtains. A brown snout. Next appeared a large round head covered in fur, and then a massive brown body. Through the openings stepped a huge grizzly bear. Or what had once been a grizzly, anyway. Mr. Darby instinctively took a step back. Then he forced himself to stand his ground. Through the rain-streaked air, the thing that had once been a bear stalked toward him, its paws splashing through puddles, twice the size of an average bear. Its fur was matted and muddy, and patches had fallen out, exposing black skin. Its oversized claws gouged the concrete. It walked with its head low, the wide mound of its back high. The bear blinked and then met Mr. Darby's gaze, revealing eyes that were colored red. In front of Mr. Darby was an animal that had been poisoned by Degraff. Mr. Darby knew this was because he'd seen the Sasquatches change in the same way. The bear stopped and rolled his head in a small circle. Mr. Darby noticed something that made his stomach churn. Insects were squirming and crawling through the bear's fur. Spiders and beetles and worms. The bear opened its jaws and a wet wad of paper tumbled out. Mr. Darby looked at the wrinkled lump for a moment and then snatched it off the street. He unwadded it and read, "I'm back, old friend." The small statement sent a chill of terror through Mr. Darby. The thing that had once been a bear turned, walked across the street, and disappeared back into the secret creepy critters, the curtains swaying in its wake. Mr. Darby stared toward the portal in silence. Memories filled his head. He clenched his hand around the paper and dropped the crumpled ball to the street, where a gust of wind sent it tumbling away. "You won't destroy me," Mr. Darby muttered to the empty space between him and the sector where Degraff was hidden. "Not a second time." The old man stood there a moment longer, his dark sunglasses concealing his eyes, his wet velvet jacket clinging to his shoulders and back. Then he sharply turned and walked off, his boots splashing mud across the colorful streets of the City of Species, which was now a city under attack. And that is the end of The Secret Zoo, Traps and Specters. I hope you guys enjoyed this book, and as you guys can tell, there's a lot left to unpackage. There's a lot of cliffhangers here, and it kind of ended at a very kind of just abrupt stop with tons happening and then just suddenly like going into a total different dynamic. But I am definitely going to be continuing the Secret Zoo series and going into our 5th book, which if you guys do not know or haven't heard of, it is The Secret Zoo Raids and Rescues. And I'm going to be starting that read-along very, very soon. So I'm excited to begin another a continuation of this read-along series. This has definitely been one of my favorite book series. And it only gets more and more interesting. And I hope to see you guys as we continue the adventure of the Secret Zoo. But as always, thank you guys so much for watching. Please take good care of yourselves and be safe. And we hope to see you soon. Bye.